Could a single bark in a raging blizzard uncover a secret that changes everything? In the heart of a ferocious snowstorm, the dense forest groaned under the wind's relentless howl, whipping snow into blinding, suffocating swirls. For hours, the blizzard had raged, burying the landscape under an oppressive, endless sheet of white. Visibility was a cruel joke, swallowed whole by the storm, and the temperature had plunged into the realm of lethal cold. Amid this frozen chaos, Jake, a seasoned rescue worker with a steely resolve, trudged through the knee-deep snow. Ahead, his companion, Max, a German shepherd whose intelligence burned bright in his sharp, focused eyes, forged onward. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a highly trained search and rescue canine, a veteran credited with saving dozens of lives. His powerful nose skimmed the surface of the suffocating snow, scanning, always scanning. But tonight, something felt different. A tension radiated from the dog that Jake hadn't sensed before. He glanced at his radio, silent, no new alerts. The official searches had concluded hours ago as the storm clamped down, sealing roads and forcing the nearby town into lockdown. It should have been a quiet, albeit brutal night. Yet, Max remained restless, driven by an unseen urgency. Suddenly, the German shepherd stopped mid-step. His ears twitched violently, capturing sounds lost to Jake in the wind's roar. His body went rigid, muscles bunching beneath his thick fur. His nose pressed frantically against one specific spot in the snowdrift, sniffing with an intensity that sent a jolt of adrenaline through Jake. A low, guttural whine vibrated in Max's chest. "What is it, buddy?" Jake asked, wading closer, his trust in Max's instincts absolute after years working together. Max answered with a sharp, urgent bark and began digging, his strong paws flinging snow aside with ferocious speed. Jake's pulse quickened, mirroring the dog's frantic energy. He dropped to his knees beside Max, his own gloved hands joining the effort, scraping through layers of packed snow and ice. The cold numbed his fingers instantly, a painful ache spreading up his arms. Then, his hand brushed against something that wasn't ice or frozen earth. Fabric. Jake froze, his breath catching painfully in his throat. He brushed away the final layer of icy crust, his fingers trembling despite the glove. Beneath the snow, nestled in the frozen ground, was a bundle. With hands that shook uncontrollably, he pulled it free. The moment his eyes focused on what lay within, his heart stopped. A baby. Impossibly small, terrifyingly fragile, wrapped in nothing but a thin, inadequate cloth. The infant's skin was a horrifying shade of blue, its tiny fingers curled and stiff. Panic surged through Jake, cold and sharp. He fumbled, pressing two numb fingers against the baby's tiny chest. A flicker. Faint, thready, almost imperceptible. But there. A heartbeat. God, his voice broke, the word dissolving into the storm. It's alive. Max whined again, nudging the infant gently with his nose, an instinctual plea for action. Jake didn't hesitate. He ripped off his own heavy, insulated coat, sacrificing his protection without a second thought. Carefully, he wrapped the baby inside, pressing the tiny, frigid body against his own chest, desperate to share his warmth. His own heartbeat thundered against his ribs as he fumbled for his radio again. I need emergency medical, now. Found a baby, newborn, buried in the snow. Still alive. Static hissed back, the storm mocking his desperation, cutting off his plea. No response. Cursing under his breath, Jake knew there was no time to wait. Clutching the precious, impossibly light bundle, He turned towards the faint hope of his truck. "Come on, Max," he urged, his voice raw with urgency. "We need to move. Now." Holding the baby wrapped tightly in his coat, Jake hurried toward the ridge where his truck waited, a dark silhouette barely discernible amid the swirling tornado. Max stayed glued to his side, a silent, furry shadow offering steadfast support. Every agonizing crunch of Jake's boots on the frozen ground echoed the frantic beat of his own heart. The wind clawed at his exposed face, stinging like 1,000 icy needles, but he didn't dare slow down. The baby in his arms was frighteningly still, a terrifying weightlessness that spoke of life hanging by the slenderest thread. He yanked the truck door open, tumbling inside, shielding the infant with his body. With one hand cradling the precious cargo, he jammed the key into the ignition and turned. Click, sputter, silence. A curse ripped from his throat, raw with panic. He tried again, praying. This time, the engine roared unwillingly to life, the heater blasting out a wave of lukewarm air that felt insultingly inadequate. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Jake peeled off his gloves, his bare hands instantly aching in the cold cab. He pressed his palm against the baby's tiny chest. The heartbeat was still there, a weak, erratic flicker against his skin. "Stay with me, kid," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He had seen what hypothermia did. He knew how quickly that fragile pulse could fade to nothing. Max whined from the passenger seat, shifting restlessly, his golden eyes filled with canine worry. Gritting his teeth against his own shivering, Jake carefully unwrapped the baby from the frozen cloth it had been buried in, then unzipped his inner layers. He pressed the infant's ice-cold skin directly against his own bare chest, pulling his heavy coat tightly around them both. Skin to skin, the fastest way. "Come on," he whispered, rocking the baby gently. "Stay with me." He barely registered the sting of tears freezing on his own cheeks. Then a sound so faint it was almost imagined, a tiny, shuddering gasp. The baby's chest rose, then fell. Slow, but there. Hope surged, fierce and desperate. "You're gonna be okay," he promised, gripping the steering wheel. "Just hold on." He slammed the truck into gear. Tires spun, fighting for purchase on the treacherous ice before lurching forward. He wrestled the radio with his free hand. "This is Jake! Emergency! Newborn, severe hypothermia. Still alive, barely. Need medics ready." Static crackled, then blessedly a voice. "Jake, this is dispatch. Confirmed. Notifying the hospital. Drive safe. That storm's brutal." "No kidding," Jake muttered, eyes straining through the whiteout. Miles blurred, then flashing lights, red and blue, cut through the tempest like a beacon. An ambulance, waiting. He barely stopped the truck before he was out, rushing towards the paramedics. "Help! The baby is still alive, but—" A medic, a woman with kind, serious eyes, took the infant gently. "So cold," she murmured, instantly wrapping the baby in a thermal blanket. "Will he make it?" Jake choked out, the question hanging heavy in the freezing air. She didn't answer directly, turning to her partner. "Warm IV fluids now." The ambulance doors slammed shut, sirens wailing as it sped away into the blizzard. Jake stood frozen, Max pressing against his leg, watching the taillights disappear, a hollow ache echoing the emptiness in his arms. All they could do now was wait. Now, the red taillights of the ambulance were swallowed by the relentless snow almost immediately, leaving Jake alone again with the screaming wind and the heavy weight of uncertainty. He didn't hesitate. Shoving Max into the passenger seat, Jake slammed the truck back into gear, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The drive to town was a treacherous crawl, the highway barely visible beneath layers of ice and swirling snow. Every mile felt like 10, his mind replaying the image of the tiny blue infant, the faint heartbeat a fragile drum against the roar of the storm. Who would do such a thing? The question echoed unanswered in the cold cab. Finally, the blurred lights of the small town emerged through the blizzard. He spotted the ambulance parked haphazardly outside the emergency entrance, its back doors flung open. Jake barely parked before he was out, Max scrambling after him onto the icy pavement. The automatic doors hissed open, bathing him in a wave of sterile warmth that felt almost alien after the brutal cold. A nurse at the front desk looked up, startled. "The baby," Jake rasped, his voice raw. "The one from the snow." "Pediatric ICU, second floor," she said quickly, pointing. "They just took him up." He sprinted for the elevator, Max trotting faithfully at his heels. As the doors opened on the second floor, a doctor in scrubs stepped out, nearly colliding with him. "You the man who found him?" the doctor asked, his eyes sharp, taking in Jake's frost-nipped face and disheveled state. Jake nodded numbly. "He's alive," the doctor confirmed, holding up a hand. "But his core temperature was dangerously low. We're working to stabilize him. He's in the NICU." Relief warred with gnawing fear. "Will he?" "We're doing everything we can," the doctor replied, his tone cautiously optimistic. "He's fighting." Just then, one of the nurses coming down the hall offered a small, tired smile. "He's a little fighter, that one. Most wouldn't have lasted." A fighter. The word resonated deep within Jake, forging an unexpected, fierce protectiveness. This tiny, unnamed life deserved more than to be discarded like trash. He was still processing this when a familiar figure approached. Sheriff Tom Reynolds, his face etched with concern beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Jake," Tom greeted him quietly. "Heard you pulled off a miracle tonight." He glanced towards the NICU doors. "Staff says the kid was only hours old, cord cut clean. Someone left him out on that back road, miles from anywhere, expecting the storm to finish the job." Tom's words hung heavy, painting a grim picture of calculated cruelty. "We've started looking, but right now, nothing. No reports, no abandoned cars. It's like he just appeared." The mystery deepened, coiling like a cold snake in Jake's gut. Who was this baby? And who wanted him silenced by the snow? The sterile quiet of the hospital felt wrong after the blizzard's chaos. Jake couldn't shake the image of the baby, fighting for life just floors above. Tom's words about the deliberate abandonment echoed. This wasn't just negligence. It felt calculated, malicious. The break came sooner than expected. Tom reappeared, his face grim. "Got something. Security footage from a gas station, maybe 10 miles from where you found him. Time stamped around 2:30 a.m. He played the grainy video on a tablet. A woman stumbled into the frame, her movements frantic, constantly glancing over her shoulder into the swirling snow. Fear radiated from her, palpable even through the poor quality footage. Then, a dark sedan pulled up abruptly. A man emerged, his features obscured, but his posture menacing. The woman recoiled, terror etched on her face, before turning and sprinting out of view. The man hesitated, then got back in his car and drove off in the opposite direction. If she was running from him, Jake theorized, his gut tightening, Maybe hiding the baby wasn't abandoning him. Maybe it was the only way to save him. Acting on a hunch, Jake drove to the only 24-hour diner near that gas station, Max waiting alertly in the truck. The weary overnight waitress squinted at the screenshot from the video. Yeah, she nodded slowly. Elena came in near frozen, scared out of her mind, said she had to get away, ran from some cabin back in the woods. Elena. A name. A lead. An hour later, Jake and Tom were navigating a snow-choked back road Tom knew led to a few old, isolated logging cabins. They found it. Run down, desolate, a cold chimney stack stark against the gray sky. Inside, the air was frigid. An overturned chair, scattered blankets, and chillingly, an empty baby bottle on a dusty table confirmed Elena and the infant had been here. But someone had left in a violent hurry. As Tom scanned the room, Jake caught movement outside, a figure darting into the tree line. "Max, go!" The shepherd shot off like a furry missile, Jake and Tom scrambling after him through the deep snow. A panicked yell echoed through the trees. They found Max pinning a struggling figure to the ground, the man from the gas station footage. It was Dario. Back at the station, Dario was tight-lipped, sneering defiance masking deep-seated fear. He admitted Elena had been at the cabin, admitted she ran, but denied everything else. Until Jake pressed him, his voice dangerously low. "That baby nearly died. Who does she belong to?" Dario flinched, then let out a chilling, low chuckle. "Belong? You don't get it. She's owned." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Tom's face hardened. Human trafficking? The network? Dario just smirked. The case had just blown wide open, revealing a horror far worse than abandonment. Just then, dispatch radioed. A woman matching Elena's description, injured, had checked into a small hospital 2 towns over. Jake was out the door before Tom finished speaking. He found Elena huddled on a hospital bed, bruised, haunted. Is my baby alive?" she whispered, tears streaming. Jake nodded gently. Slowly, haltingly, she confirmed the unimaginable. Kidnapped, held by a trafficking ring called the Network, run by a phantom named Victor Delgado. When she discovered her pregnancy, she knew they'd sell her child. Dario was one of her captors. Hiding her baby in the snow wasn't abandonment. It was a desperate act of love, a gamble to draw the hunters away from her most precious possession. Elena's horrifying story hung heavy in the small hospital room. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor who had risked everything. But her relief was short-lived. "They have people everywhere," she whispered, eyes darting nervously towards the door. "They won't stop." Her words proved chillingly prophetic. Minutes later, a knock. A nurse peeked in. "Detectives?" "There's an officer downstairs, says he's here for Ms. Rodriguez's protection detail." Jake and Tom exchanged sharp glances. "We didn't request backup," Tom said, his voice low and tight. Alarm bells screamed in Jake's head. They moved fast, intercepting the officer at the main desk. He looked the part, uniform, badge, but something felt wrong, too rigid, his eyes scanning too quickly. "Who sent you?" Jake challenged. The man recited standard procedure, but a quick call to dispatch confirmed Jake's suspicion. No officer dispatched. "Try again," Jake said, his hand moving instinctively towards where a weapon would be if he were armed inside the hospital. The imposter didn't wait. He lunged, not for Elena, but towards the exit. Jake reacted instantly, tackling him hard into a row of waiting room chairs as startled cries erupted. Tom was on him in a second, disarming and cuffing him. But amidst the chaos, a horrifying realization dawned. Jake sprinted back towards Elena's room, dread coiling in his stomach. The room was empty. A terrified nurse stammered. Another officer said he was moving her to a safe wing. No, they'd used the diversion. The network had her. But Elena wasn't helpless. Bundled into the back of a dark SUV speeding away from the hospital, her mind raced. She felt the sharp edge of the plastic shard she'd palmed from the floor during the earlier scuffle. As the car slowed for a red light, she saw her chance. Working frantically, she sliced through the zip tie binding her wrists. The driver glanced back, suspicion dawning, but it was too late. Elena threw her shoulder against the door, shoving it open and tumbling onto the wet street. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but adrenaline surged. She scrambled up and ran, ignoring the blare of horns. Headlights flooded the street ahead, Tom's cruiser screeching to a halt. Jake leaped out. "Elena!" She ran towards him as the driver who'd abducted her skidded to a stop, trapped. He bolted on foot. "He's mine!" Jake yelled, taking off in pursuit, weaving through alleys before tackling the man hard against a brick wall. Back at the station, facing two captured operatives, the pressure mounted. Jake slammed his fist on the interrogation table. Delgado, the warehouse, where and when? Cornered and facing decades behind bars, the second man finally broke, spilling the location and the time of an upcoming shipment, the moment Victor Delgado himself was expected to be there. The final showdown was set. The warehouse loomed out of the industrial district's pre-dawn gloom, a nondescript brick building masking unimaginable cruelty. From their vantage point across the street, Jake and Tom watched shadows move behind grimy windows, the occasional flash of a flashlight cutting the darkness. Men shifted crates, vehicles arrived and departed with hushed efficiency, the sinister gears of the network grinding away. Backup was closing in, forming a silent perimeter, but the intel suggested Delgado wouldn't linger. Time was critical. "See him yet?" Jake whispered into his radio, scanning the figures near a loading bay. "Negative," Tom breathed back. "But activity's picking up. Looks like the shipment's prepping." Max, ever vigilant, sat pressed against Jake's leg, ears twitching, sensing the coiled tension. Then, the signal crackled. "Units in position." Green light. "Let's end this," Tom muttered, drawing his weapon. The night exploded. Police strobes sliced through the darkness, sirens suddenly screaming, converging on the warehouse from all sides. Shouted commands cut through the air. Doors burst open. Chaos erupted inside. Startled shouts turned to panicked yells, punctuated by the sharp crack of gunfire. Men scattered like rats, some firing blindly, others desperately trying to breach the tightening police cordon. Jake and Tom moved fast, pushing through the main entrance, using overturned pallets for cover. The air was thick with cordite and fear. They advanced deeper into the cavernous space, eyes scanning for their target. Then, Jake saw him, a well-dressed man with cold eyes, already near a back exit, flanked by two guards who were laying down covering fire. "Delgado, back door!" Jake yelled. They broke cover, sprinting through the firefight. Delgado's guards fell as other officers engaged them. Delgado burst through the rear exit into a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway. Jake pounded after him, the heavy thud of his own boots echoing Delgado's frantic footsteps. The man was surprisingly fast, fueled by desperation. But Tom, anticipating the move, cut him off at the alley's mouth. Delgado skidded to a halt, trapped, panting heavily, rain plastering his expensive suit to his skin. His eyes darted wildly between Jake approaching from behind and Tom blocking his escape. "It's over, Delgado," Jake said, his gun steady. For a moment, pure rage twisted Delgado's features, but the sight of multiple weapons trained on him drained the fight away. Slowly, agonizingly, he raised his hands. Tom moved in swiftly, cuffing him tightly. "Victor Delgado," Tom stated formally, "you're under arrest." A collective exhale seemed to pass through the surrounding officers. The ghost was caught. The network's head was severed. Later, in the quiet safety of a protected room, Elena watched the breaking news report on a small television, tears silently tracking paths down her bruised cheeks as images of the raid and Delgado's arrest flashed across the screen. Miles away, in the sterile warmth of the NICU, a tiny chest rose and fell with a strengthening, steady rhythm, monitored by beeping machines that now sounded like a lullaby of hope. Back at his truck, Jake leaned against the hood, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving in bone-deep exhaustion. Max rested his head on Jake's knee, looking up with those knowing eyes. They hadn't set out to dismantle a trafficking ring that night. They just followed an instinct, answered a silent plea buried in the snow. But in doing so, they had brought down monsters and given a mother and child a chance at a future. A fragile flicker of light ignited in the heart of the storm. The town hailed him as a hero. His keen instincts not only saved a life but unraveled the dark web of the trafficking network. Medals and praise awaited, but Max's reward was the steady thump of his tail against Jake's leg, a bond unbroken. The story of their courage rippled beyond the hospital walls, a beacon of hope in a world often cloaked in shadow. It spoke of sacrifice, Jake's relentless drive, Max's unwavering instinct, Elena's desperate fight for her child, and the unyielding power of compassion to defy despair. As dawn broke, painting the snow-dusted town in hues of gold, Jake and Max stepped back into the cold, ready for their next mission. They carried no capes, only grit and heart, determined to shine light into forgotten corners. For Elena and her son, a new chapter beckoned, built on the ashes of fear and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. This gripping tale of survival and courage leaves us with questions. What would you do in Elena's desperate shoes, fighting to save your child? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's spark a conversation about resilience and hope. If Jake, Max, and Elena's story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more heart-pounding, real-life-inspired stories that shine light in the darkest moments. Your support fuels our mission to bring these powerful narratives to life. Stay tuned for more tales of bravery and redemption, and tell us, what story do you want to hear next?